And here we are in part 2 of writing clear rules. The next of the 10 need-to-knows. Sequence of play has displaced reference style in rules writing despite its problems. Now we're talking about rules that are beyond the inside the box top rules that you sometimes get for mass market games. Old hobby game rules were highly organized and easy to refer back to, what I call the reference style. Often they were numbered. Sometimes they were numbered through 3 levels. It could get extreme. Modern rules are for the age of instant gratification. They are organized in order of play, in order of what the player encounters when they're playing. So they're called sequence of play rules. Rarely are the rules numbered. Why? Because so many people try to read the rules for the first time when playing the game. I think that's horrible, but I've seen people do it. And inevitably you're going to screw it up, but people don't seem to mind. That's how they want to do it. Unfortunately, sequence of play rules are just awful for looking things up, as opposed to reference rules, which were organized to make it easy to look things up. But remember, we're contrasting an old style where players typically read the rules to the new style where players typically don't read the rules, but there are a few people who read rules and teach the other people how to play. And so for all that, sequence of play is how most games are done, although hex and counter war games can still be an exception. What are the differences between mechanics, rules, and descriptions? Mechanics are the actual methods the game uses. Rules precisely define the mechanics. Now, when they're in a game design document or equivalent, those rules are turned into software that enforces those mechanics for a video game. For a tabletop game, the players have to apply and enforce the rules, unfortunately because they misunderstand, they forget, they willfully do things wrongly, and so forth. Now, descriptions describe, the game and the mechanics, but they're not precise. You describe the game to a potential buyer or a funder, or you describe the game to somebody who's thinking about playing, or you describe it to programmers before you move on to the precision of rules in a game design document or the equivalent. So descriptions can be simpler, they can be briefer, but they're not sufficient to play the game. Put yourself in a reader's place. Try to imagine yourself reading your document as someone who knows nothing about the game. What's clear to you may not be clear to someone else because they have a different experience set than you do. In any case, you know the game very well and they don't. So look for phrases that might be interpreted ludicrously. Look for every kind of possible double meaning. Of course, it's even better if you have a really good editor and they can read the rules and look for these things and they're not in your head and they don't know the game as well as you do. That works out very well. I tend to have my wife read rules when they're in a very late stage of development, and she is not a game player, although she used to play Dungeons and Dragons, and consequently she misunderstands things in ways that I never thought of. And then I can try to sort it out so they won't be misunderstood that way. As such, she's not an editor, but she's sort of a playtester, ideal playtester for rules. Now, what a lot of people do nowadays in games is they put the rules on the cards, or as much of the rules of the game as possible. That way, players don't have to read the rules before they play. They only have to read the rules when they get the card. On the other hand, you have the 7-line rule, which is if there's more than 7 lines of rules on the card, people won't read all of it. Well, that's a rule from a few years ago, and I think nowadays it's becoming more like 5 lines or less. The rules on the cards tend to be exceptions to the standard rules, So it makes sense to keep the exceptions separate from the main rules. In other words, keep them on the cards. And you hope that the rules on the cards will be self-contained so that they don't say, see the main rules. Now, learning aids are important. The rules in it should include lots of assists. I almost always make a cheat sheet, a player's aid. For all but the simplest games, it's a one-page summary of how the game works. It's not that players have to read the rules, but the ones who do like to have a written reference have one. You should also have examples of plays in the rules. In the rules you should have a section, rules often missed or misunderstood, however you phrase that, to highlight particular rules. You should include a playthrough if possible. One of the big problems people have is they're not sure they're playing the game correctly. If you can describe the first few turns of a game, and if they bother to read that, then they can have a much better idea whether they're playing the game correctly or not. Ideally, the playthrough would be a video, but tabletop game publishers do not generally include videos with the game. Occasionally they'll make a video and put it on the web, but there are lots and lots of people who cannot manage to access videos on the web and play them, believe me. And there are lots of other things you might include. Again, this is a summary. Test rules as you play test the game. It's a process. It's not a one-shot. I've heard of people who design a game and then write the rules after they think the game is done. That's nuts. You need to have the rules with the game. Even if the players aren't reading the rules, you should be looking things up in the rules to make sure they're in there when players ask questions. It's true of any writing, especially technical writing. You have to revise it. And then as the game changes, you revise the rules. And then you have to play with the new rules. And the same thing when you change software. When you change the rules, how the software does things, then you can introduce new problems. Now that's 10, and again I could have done a lot more, but there's a limited amount of time I want to devote to this. I have a class, How to Write Clear Rules and Game Design Documents, with more than 60 screencasts like this one in it. And for more information and discounts, you can see pulsifergames.com.